Story 1. The Radius. I still think about the moment the flashlight hit the brush and flashed back off glass. Not eyes, not an animal, not some drunk idiot stumbling around in the dark. Binoculars, held perfectly still. By then my tent was half ripped out of the ground and my Jeep was open and ready, and somehow that made it worse. Whoever was out there hadn't made a move toward me at all. They were just waiting for me to understand the rules. My name's Nolan Voss. I'm 42, and I work contract wildlife surveys, which means I spend more nights alone than most people would choose. In early November, I drove out west of Hanksville, Utah, to test a new cold-weather sleep setup before a longer trip. The site was miles off the highway, tucked between slick rock shelves and thick juniper. It felt good in the ordinary way those places do. Dry sage in the air, ozone from weather moving in, wind threading through slot canyons somewhere beyond camp. I cooked noodles on a stove, checked my layers, and burned a little deadfall before turning in. The first thing that bothered me was a single river stone on the hood of my Jeep. Smooth, dark, damp, placed dead center on the dust like somebody had lined it up carefully. There wasn't a river anywhere near that camp. I picked it up and it left a clean wet circle behind. I remember looking around and deciding some kids from another site must have left it there earlier in the day and the moisture was just condensation. Strange, but still within reach of an explanation. I've camped through hail, blown tires, coyotes fighting in the dark, and one black bear nosing around a cooler in Montana. When you spend enough time outside, you start sorting things fast. Sound to weather, tracks to animal, mistake to the most likely person. That's how you stay useful. So I set the stone on the table, zipped the tent, and sat back down. The only detail that stayed with me was how clean the dust looked around the stone. No finger marks, no drag, just that one perfect wet ring. After sundown, the desert changed in a way I noticed before I understood. It wasn't louder. It was deader. For that temperature, there should have been insects making at least some thin layer of noise under the wind. But there was nothing. Just the fire ticking and gusts moving through juniper. Then I saw a flash of reflective tape up in a tree about 30 feet from camp. It was my spare jacket, the silver gray shell I kept packed inside the tent. It hung over a branch with the sleeves down, neat as laundry. I stood so fast my chair kicked over behind me. From out in the brush came the sound of something heavy stepping on dead branches. Then silence. Not scrambling, not animal movement, just one hard snap and then nothing. I took the jacket down, checked the tent, and found my keys, wallet, and GPS untouched in the mesh pocket beside my sleeping bag. That gave me a stupid little surge of relief. I told myself I'd moved the jacket earlier and forgotten. Tired people do that. But when I sat back in the chair, the footsteps started again. That was when I began tracking the sound like sign. Same distance every time, somewhere beyond the firelight, moving in a slow arc from my left, behind the Jeep, then off to the right. Never closer, never farther. I can identify local fauna from tracks and gait without much trouble. And this wasn't anything wild. It was a person controlling distance. Every now and then the wind pushed in a smell of ozone from the storm and something underneath it, old sweat in cotton. I stood. The steps stopped. I sat. They resumed. I put on my headlamp and checked the edge of camp. Near the rear tire I found boot prints in the dust. Fresh, sharp edges. Narrow heel, deeper at the toe, somebody leaning forward as they walked. The tracks came in from the brush, went to the tent, then back out the same way. My fingers started losing precision after that. I missed the zipper pull twice. I called out and kept my voice steady. If you're looking for your sight, keep moving. No answer. Just wind. Then, from the dark on my right, a low whistle drifted in. It was my tune. An old folk melody my grandfather used to hum while he sharpened knives in his garage. I had been humming it to myself while I cleaned my pot after dinner, not even thinking about it. The person out there copied the phrase exactly, then stopped before the last two notes. I felt my pulse high in my throat. I said louder, "I can hear you." What came back was a stretch of silence so complete it felt deliberate. Then one branch snapping behind me where nobody should have been if they were still on the right. I stayed there another minute or two because part of me still wanted one clean explanation. Maybe a hunter messing around. Maybe someone from another site trying to spook me before moving on. I fed another branch to the fire and watched how the light hit the brush. Nothing moved inside it, but I could feel attention on me as clearly as heat on my shins. When the wind dropped, the silence had weight to it. Then I heard one more snap, this time directly in line with the stone still sitting on my table, and I understood that whoever was out there had arranged the whole evening like a sequence. The stone first, the jacket second, the tune third, little things, each one deniable by itself. At that point, I stopped worrying about being reasonable and started packing. Not neatly, just fast. Stove in the tote. Food bin in the Jeep. Chair half folded and shoved behind the seat. The person kept moving in that same circle while I worked. If I crossed camp, the arc shifted. If I stopped, the steps stopped. It felt less like being hunted than being measured. I wanted to see farther out, so I grabbed the tactical flashlight from the door pocket. It was heavy and brighter than anything I actually needed for camping, but I used it for fieldwork. I waited until the steps were on the far side of the Jeep, then swept the juniper with a hard white beam. Branches, trunk, pale dirt, then two bright circles flashed back at me. Not eyes, glass, binocular lenses. Someone was crouched low in the brush, holding them perfectly still and watching me pack. That was the moment my body quit pretending for me. My chest went tight, breaths short and shallow, and my hands started slipping on everything I touched. I yanked the whole tent free without breaking down the poles. The fabric dragged through dirt and snagged on sage. I nearly fell trying to rip it loose. The person didn't run, didn't duck, didn't say a word. They stayed there behind the binoculars, calm as if the whole point had been to let me know I was being watched. I threw the tent into the Jeep, left the fire burning high, and backed out too fast, spraying gravel. I kept expecting somebody to step into the headlights or grab the side ladder, but nothing did. The drive back to the highway felt endless. Wind shoved the Jeep around, and every wall of brush looked like it might open and spill someone into the road. I drove straight to a truck stop off the interstate and stayed there till dawn under canopy lights that buzzed like machinery. I didn't turn on the radio once. The truck stop helped in the shallowest possible way. There were people, cameras, receipts, fluorescent lights, all the things that are supposed to make a place legible again. I bought coffee I didn't want and sat where I could see the Jeep from the diner window. Every time a man crossed the lot in a dark jacket, my hands tightened around the cup hard enough to ache. I kept telling myself nobody had followed me. I also kept checking the mirrors on the parked rigs for movement behind me. I never reported it. I knew how it would sound, and I didn't have enough to make anybody move on it. The next week, I installed a 360 dashcam system that records even when the engine is off. I tested it in my driveway, walked circles around the Jeep, stood in blind spots, checked playback frame by frame. I still work alone because that's the job, but I don't sit by small comfort fires anymore, and I don't ignore tiny things that don't fit. I keep my spare clothes in hard cases now. I park so I can leave without backing up. What keeps catching in my mind is the choice that person made. They went into my tent, close enough to take the jacket from the back of the bag and hang it in the tree, then left my keys, my wallet, and my GPS untouched. They risked being caught for an act that didn't profit them at all. I still don't know what they wanted from me if it wasn't theft, and that question has made every empty campsite feel smaller than it should. I still stop at truck stops now when I need a break from driving, and I still choose the brightest part of the lot without even thinking about it. The dashcams help in the way locks help. They give your hands something practical to do. They don't answer anything. What stays with me is how patient that person was. No rush, no threats, no attempt to take the obvious valuables. Just a careful little sequence designed for one audience. Me. That means there was a reason, even if I never learned it. And once you accept that, you start wondering how many bad places begin with one tiny detail that makes no sense and only later turns into a pattern. The next one starts with coordinates, and with a campsite that looked too perfect to belong to nobody. Story 2. The coordinates. The first thing I saw was the tent. The second thing I saw was the mud. That's the order that matters, because if I'd noticed the mud first, I might have turned around right there. Brand new canvas, perfectly pitched, in a clearing no one had used before, and not one footprint leading to it. After a 10-mile hike, your brain wants relief so badly it'll accept almost anything as normal. Mine did. For another hour, anyway. I'm Talia Breen, 29, and I hike alone often enough that it isn't dramatic anymore. It's just how I reset. I plan routes, print backups, cache maps offline, and I always sleep with my boots inside the tent, never in the vestibule. This trip was in the Pacific Northwest in late September, off a lesser-known trail I found on an old hiking forum. The first day's route ended at GPS coordinates for a hidden backcountry site about 10 steep miles in. By the time I pushed through the last line of pines, my shoulders were cooked from the pack and I was thinking about water, food, and not moving again till morning. The clearing stopped me cold. There was already a canvas tent there, brand new by the look of it, pitched perfectly tight in the middle of the flat ground. The site itself was strange before I even got to the tent. It was almost too clean. No deadfall, no loose branches, no old fire ring, no ash, nothing that suggested anyone had camped there before. The ground was soft enough to show my own boots immediately. But around that tent there were no footprints. None coming in, none going out. I dropped my pack and stood there staring long enough that my breathing started sounding rude in all that silence. Dense timber swallows distance. There should have been birds or at least some low forest chatter. Instead it felt padded over. The first explanation I found was that whoever owned the tent had pitched it earlier while the ground was drier, then gone off on a summit push before the weather turned. It was late enough for somebody ambitious to try something dumb like that. Up close, the details got worse in a quiet way. The guy lines weren't tied with ordinary camping hitches. They were done in these complicated maritime knots, neat and practiced, the kind you see in instructional diagrams with labels. That didn't scare me. It interested me. I remember actually crouching to look closer and thinking, okay, whoever set this up knows rope work, probably sails or works around boats. That became my first little working theory, and having a theory made the clearing feel less wrong. I called out twice. No answer. The zipper on the canvas tent moved smoothly when I opened it, like it had never touched dust. Inside there was no sleeping bag, no pad, no clothes, no food wrappers, no lantern. Just a folded industrial tarp and a brand new folding shovel laid side by side. I stood there with the flap in my hand and felt the back of my neck go tight. Still didn't read as immediate danger. It read as arrangement, like I'd arrived halfway through somebody else's process and was missing context. That feeling made me start looking, really looking. I circled the clearing slowly. The smell of wet earth was heavy enough to taste, and every step released the sweet rot of old pine needles from the mud. On the north side I found the first trail marker, a bright strip of ribbon tied to a low branch. Then another farther down. Then another. They didn't point back toward the actual trail. They led away from camp and down into a steep ravine choked with fern and shadow. I followed them far enough to confirm direction, then stopped. I wasn't trying to be brave. I wanted to know what system I had walked into. Back at the clearing, I started matching details against each other the way you do with a puzzle on a table. Clean site, new tent, no tracks, maritime knots, empty interior, markers leading deeper away from the trail. None of it fit one normal explanation, which only made me more curious. I told myself there could be some legal but weird reason for all of it. Survey work. A buried cache for trail maintenance. Even a prank, though 10 miles in is a stupid place for a prank. I dug my cat hole well away from camp, behind a cedar where the ground looked softer, and on the second scrape my trowel hit hard plastic. The sound was wrong enough that I froze with one knee in the mud. I cleared more dirt with my glove and found the lid of a storage bin buried exactly about a foot down. Not deep enough for long-term concealment, just hidden from casual sight. I got it open with the edge of my trowel. Inside were heavy-duty zip ties, dozens of them, all bundled in factory packs. Nothing else. I remember sitting back on my heels with the open bin in front of me and feeling the whole trip rearrange itself in my head. The forum thread, the coordinates, the perfect hidden site, the empty tent waiting in a clearing no one had used before, the markers leading down, the shovel, the tarp, the zip ties. Every item by itself was deniable. Together they felt like a sentence I did not want to finish reading. I took my phone out mostly to prove something mundane to myself. There wasn't service out there, but I had some forum pages cached offline from planning the route. I pulled up the thread and started reading with dirt on my hands. The coordinates had been posted by an anonymous account that changed names slightly every few months, but the language was the same. Friendly, specific, tailored, best secluded site for solo hikers. Flat ground, water nearby, great tree cover. Over the last year, people had thanked that account for direct messages with exact camping spots all over the region. Mostly solo hikers. Mostly people mentioning they were going alone. I didn't break camp because I never really made camp. I shoved the phone in my pocket, left my own pack where it landed, and started hiking out with just my headlamp, water bottle, and the knife from my hip belt. The trail back was steeper in the dark, all slick roots and wet stone. Branches kept brushing my shoulders from both sides, and every little snag felt intentional. I didn't stop to drink. I didn't rest. Twice I thought I heard movement off the trail below me, pace to match mine, but the forest was so dense it could have been water shifting through brush. Or not. My chest hurt from how hard I was breathing before I hit the first switchback I recognized near the trailhead. When I finally reached asphalt, I bent over with my hands on my knees and dry-heaved beside the parking lot like I'd sprinted a race. I drove to a motel with all the lights on and didn't sleep anyway. The next day I reported the coordinates, the buried bin, all of it. I never got a clean answer back. Search teams went in, from what I was told, but nothing I could attach to a solved event ever came of it. The forum account disappeared for a while. Then versions of it came back. Now I check that forum every night before bed. Not because I think I'll catch the person. I don't even know if it was one person. I check because I keep thinking about the ravine at the end of those bright markers and how careful the setup was. Careful enough to repeat. Careful enough to scale. What bothers me most is that the tent had been new. Whoever planned that place expected enough use to bring in clean gear, clean tools, and replaceable supplies, and then walk away forever. I can stop myself from clicking strange coordinates now. Still picture those ribbons moving without wind in that ravine. I can't stop wondering how many more plastic bins are still buried around that ravine, or how many other clearings like that exist. I used to think the worst part of hiking alone would be a fall, a storm, a wrong turn, one big mistake with a simple shape. This was different. This was deliberate in the quietest possible way. Post on a forum. A map pin. A clearing made to feel like luck. That's what keeps it lodged in my head. Nothing in that place looked dramatic until the pieces touched each other. And once they did, I couldn't unsee the picture. I still read trip reports differently now. I still notice who says they're going alone. I still wonder how many people clicked on kindness because it sounded knowledgeable and precise. The next story happens in the exact opposite kind of place. Crowded, noisy, almost impossible to disappear in. That doesn't help nearly as much as you'd think. Story 3. The copycat. I could have handled someone staring. I could have handled someone following me to the bathhouse, even though I probably would have packed up early and lied to everyone about why. What I still can't file away anywhere useful is the sound they made outside my tent. Not the zipper itself. Their mouth copying it, slowly, right where my hand would have reached if I'd decided to get out a few seconds earlier. My name's Ivy Mercer. I was 22, just out of college, and trying hard to become the kind of person who could enjoy being alone on purpose. I am not naturally that person. I overpack, especially medical stuff. I had a first aid kit big enough for a group and somehow still forgot extra batteries for my lantern, which tells you a lot about me then. It was peak summer at a state park in northern Michigan, one of those busy family campgrounds with numbered sites, bathhouses, kids on scooters, and enough RV generators humming that true silence never happened. I picked it because it felt safe to me. I got there in the late afternoon, set up my bright orange tent by a picnic table, and spent too long making everything look cheerful. Lantern hung, cooler under the table, paperback out, tiny string lights clipped inside the tent. Across the dirt road was another campsite, half shaded by pines. I noticed the other camper because their tent was the exact same make and the same obnoxiously bright orange as mine. Same rainfly, same shape, same little black repair patch near the lower seam. I laughed and thought, of course, that big outdoor retailer had put them on sale all spring. Even then, there was something off about that site. Families on both sides had coolers open, radios on low, folding chairs out. That site had one chair, one table, one tent, and no normal signs of camping. No stove. No towel draped over a line. No flashlight waiting for dark. Just a person moving quietly in and out of view while they set things up. I thought about saying hi, then decided not to. I didn't want campsite small talk all weekend. By evening, the whole loop smelled like charcoal and sunscreen. Kids were still shouting near the dumpsters. Somebody's country playlist kept skipping at the same line. I cooked pasta on my camp stove and read by lantern light. When I looked up, the other camper was sitting at their own table in the dark. No lantern, no fire, no headlamp. Just a shape sitting there. That bothered me in the kind of way that makes you feel petty for being bothered. I told myself I only noticed because their silence was framed by everybody else's noise. I turned a page in my book and saw movement across from me. The other camper lifted one hand and made the same little page-turn motion in the air. Not exaggerated. Just matching. I held still, then looked back down because I didn't want to create a weird moment if I was misunderstanding it. A minute later, I shifted in my seat, tucking one foot under the bench. Across the road, the silhouette shifted too. Same posture. Same angle of the head. I felt heat crawl up my neck. My brain went straight to the explanation that made me look least ridiculous. Maybe they were stretching. Maybe I was pattern matching. I made myself keep reading. Every few lines I looked up without moving my head much, and every time the shape across the road seemed settled into whatever position I was in. When I finally closed the book, the other figure lowered their hands too. The lantern hissed softly beside me. Moths tapped against the glass. Across the road, there was still no light at all. I decided a bathhouse walk would reset me. The bathrooms were maybe a minute away, past 2 RVs and a family site with a hammock. I grabbed my shower caddy and went. I heard footsteps behind me about half a minute later, measured enough that I knew before I turned who it probably was. The other camper came in while I was washing my hands. In the mirror, I could see them standing by the sinks, not using one, just looking at the mirror like they were waiting for instructions. Adult height, average build, baseball cap. I dried my hands too quickly and left. They came out right after me. Not close enough that I could call it following without sounding dramatic, but close enough that I had to keep editing my own reaction. Other people were around. A girl was braiding her friend's hair at the next site. A man in sandals was hauling ice from his trunk. Nobody else seemed to think anything was wrong. If I went to the camp host and said the person across from me copied how I sat and stood by a mirror, I'd sound unstable. So I went back to my site and pretended routine still existed. To break the tension, or maybe to prove there was a normal social script available, I gave a quick wave across the road. The person didn't wave back in any ordinary way. They raised their hand slowly to the exact same angle mine had been at and held it there. I lowered mine. They waited a beat, then lowered theirs. I laughed once under my breath. I packed away the stove, zipped up the cooler, and told myself I was going to bed early because I was tired, not because I wanted nylon between me and whatever this was. Inside the tent, the air was stale and warm from the day's heat stored in the ground. My lantern batteries were already dying, going from steady yellow to that weak pulsing glow that makes everything feel sick. I checked my phone, no signal. Outside, the campground kept making its normal sounds. Latches clicking, somebody coughing, generator hum. Those regular noises should have helped. Instead, they made me more aware of the missing sounds from directly across the road. No zipper, no chair scrape, no footsteps. It was like the site opposite me existed only when I looked at it. Sometime after midnight, after my lantern had given up and I was lying there with my hands folded tight on my stomach, I heard my tent zipper move. Not the actual zipper, the imitation of it, right next to the nylon wall at the height of a person's mouth. A slow, raspy zzzzp, dragging from the bottom corner toward the top. Then silence. Then again. I stopped breathing so completely my chest hurt. My keys were in the pocket by my head. My first aid kit was by my feet, absurdly prepared for every emergency except the one I had. I whispered, "Go away!" The answer was another fake zipper sound, slower this time, followed by 3 soft taps where the real zipper pulls sat on the outside. Not random taps. Exact location. My hands were sweating so badly I almost dropped my headlamp when I turned it on. The beam was weak because I had no spare batteries. I told myself if I called for the host, it would break whatever performance this was. But part of me was still trapped in the fear of being wrong in front of strangers. I lay there a few more seconds while the person outside copied the sound of my breathing back at me, a fraction late. That delay is what finally made me unzip the tent and lunge out. I didn't feel brave. I felt humiliated into movement. I came out yelling before I had words, headlamp beam jerking across the dirt road. The person was standing barefoot a few feet from my tent, toes sunk into the powdery soil, body angled toward me like they'd been listening. They were wearing my jacket. Not just the same brand. My jacket, or something so perfect my brain couldn't separate the two. It was the faded green vintage shell I wore on hikes. The one with the little rip under the left pocket and all the national park patches I'd sewn on by hand. Same crooked Olympic patch. Same discolored thread. Same everything. I made a sound I have never made before or since. Not a scream exactly, more like all the air in me trying to leave at once. I swung the weak headlamp beam straight into their face. I wish I could tell you what I saw. I saw skin. Eyes narrowed against the light. A mouth already shaping itself into the same open panic I knew was on mine. Even that was copied. I shouted for the camp host then, full volume, words finally coming. "Hey! Help! Get over here!" Lights came on in 2 RV windows almost immediately. The mimic turned and ran without a word. Fast, silent, barefoot, straight into the woods behind the opposite site. No crashing, no branches snapping the way they should have. Just movement vanishing into dark pines. I stood in the road shaking so badly my knees kept dipping. A man from 3 sites down came out with a flashlight and kept asking what happened, and I couldn't answer in order. The camp host showed up in pajama pants and boots. We all looked at the site across from mine together. The tent was there. The chair. And inside the tent were duplicates or near duplicates of things from my campsite. Same brand of cooler in the wrong color. Same paperback with a different cover edition. Same style enamel mug. Same cheap string lights. They never found the person that night. Rangers walked the tree line. The host took my statement. Other campers stood around in flip-flops pretending not to stare at me while absolutely staring. I packed in a rush and left before dawn, with the jacket folded in a trash bag in my trunk because I couldn't make myself wear it. Later, one detail got under my skin worse than the rest. The patches on that copied jacket were exact, right down to the faded colors and loose stitching. I had sewn those on myself over years, one at a time, with combinations you couldn't buy anywhere. I donated the real jacket the next week and stopped wearing anything distinctive in public, no patches, no bright colors, no little markers that made me easy to notice. But I still don't know where they got those patches, because some of them were old visitor center designs that had been out of print since before I learned how to drive. I told people for a while that donating the jacket made me feel better. That isn't true. It just removed one argument from my head. I didn't want to keep proving to myself that the original still existed when the copied one existed too. That's the part one can't close. They left gear behind. They ran. They were interrupted, which means the process wasn't finished. Whatever version of me they were building had stopped in the middle, and I don't know what the rest would have looked like if I'd stayed quiet in the tent a little longer. I still avoid campgrounds where sites face each other directly across a road. And I still notice mirrors first. The next story proves that even a vehicle you built with your own hands can become unfamiliar in one night. Story 4. Under the mattress. When my hand touched that sock, I thought it had fallen out of a laundry bag I didn't remember packing. It was warm. That's what made me roll off the mattress and reach for the flashlight. Warm and damp, tucked halfway out from the dark compartment under my bed like the van had grown some new private detail while I was driving. I built that van myself. There should not have been a single surprise left inside it. My name's Cormac Hale. I was 58 then, Driving alone from New Mexico to the coast in a camper van I built out myself over 2 winters in my garage. Walnut trim, insulated walls, hidden battery bank, water tank, custom bed platform. Every inch measured twice. I knew that vehicle better than some houses I've lived in. In late October, after a long desert stretch, I pulled into a designated overnight lot beside a truck stop off the interstate. The kind where RVs line up in orderly rows under bad lights and promise themselves 6 hours of sleep before moving on. It wasn't scenic, but it was populated, legal, and bright enough to feel safe. Diesel exhaust hung in the air over cooling asphalt. Idling rigs sent a low vibration through the ground. I ate a sandwich in the driver's seat, locked up, and climbed into bed thinking the worst part of the night would be the noise. The first thing I noticed was the roof vent. The interior latch was flipped open. I distinctly remembered securing it before I got on the highway, because crosswind catches that vent in an ugly way if you leave it loose. I reached up, shut it, and gave it a testing tug. Cheap plastic latch, I thought. 80 miles an hour over broken interstate, and it probably rattled itself loose. That was irritating, not alarming. I made a note to replace the part when I got home. I changed into a t-shirt, set my glasses in the tray by the bed, and did the usual final checks. Doors locked. Side door secure. Back doors secure. Keys in the ignition where I always left them in parking lots so I could move fast if I needed to. I was halfway under the blanket when I caught the smell of something sweet and chalky, like artificial peanut butter. Took me a second to place it because I don't eat those things. On the kitchenette counter sat a half-eaten protein bar in a wrapper I recognized mostly because I disliked that brand enough to remember the color. I stood there looking at it with my hand still on the blanket. Then I gave myself the most practical answer available. I must have picked it up at the last gas station in a rush, set it down absent-mindedly, and forgotten. I am organized, not infallible. I tossed the wrapper in the sink and settled back in. The van felt colder than it should have. Not air conditioner cold, because the roof unit hadn't been run all day, just oddly cellar cool, especially down near the floorboards. I put that down to the night air and metal body panels losing heat fast. Then the water pump cycled. Just a quick mechanical hum from under the bench seat, half a second at most. That pump only comes on when a faucet handle is turned or pressure drops. I lay still and ran through the system in my head. Maybe I hadn't shut the galley tap all the way after brushing my teeth. Maybe the line had burped air. Annoying. Explainable. I climbed down to check. The little chrome handle was centered exactly where it should be. No drip in the sink. No leak under the counter. I crouched there, listening, with one hand braced on the cabinet face. Outside, trucks kept coming and going, air brakes coughing, diesel engines idling, people talking somewhere under the sodium lights. That normal noise should have flattened everything else. Instead, it made the inside of the van feel sealed off, like all that life was on the other side of thick glass. I closed the faucet, though there was nothing to close, and when I straightened up I saw the cabinet door under the sink hanging slightly open. That door covered the gray water tank housing and a bit of miscellaneous storage. I knew the latch on it too. Spring-loaded marine catch, reliable, installed by me. But now the wood panel was bowed outward from the inside by maybe an inch. Not dramatically. Just enough that the line of shadow along the frame looked wrong. I stared at it longer than I want to admit. Then I told myself the obvious thing. Road vibration had jostled a cleaning bottle or a roll of paper towels against the back of the door and popped the catch. I remember actually hearing the tone of my own thinking, clipped and technical, the same voice I'd used for years when something on a job site went sideways. Assess. Confirm. Correct. So I took the flashlight from the shelf and crouched. The van was cold enough at floor level that I could feel it through my knees. I put one hand on the cabinet edge, aimed the beam into the narrow crack, and leaned in. At first all I saw was darkness and the dull curve of plumbing. Then a hand came out. Not lunging. Not grabbing. A filthy human hand with black dirt ground into the knuckles and a strip of grease across the wrist. It slid into the crack, found the edge of the wood from inside, and pulled the cabinet door calmly shut. My body moved before my thoughts did. I was up, keys in my fist, side door flying open, bare feet hitting the metal steps so hard I bruised them. I don't remember deciding to leave the wallet, the phone cable, the water bottle. I remember the smell that rushed up when the cabinet closed. Sweat, damp fabric, something sour and trapped. I remember my chest going so tight I couldn't get a full breath until I was outside. The lot lights felt painfully bright. The asphalt was still holding heat from the day, but I was cold all the way through. I ran straight for the diner attached to the truck stop. Barefoot across asphalt scattered with gravel and old oil slicks, weaving between parked pickups, hearing one trucker shout something after me that didn't even register as words. My legs were working badly, like the joints had come loose. Inside the diner everything was too clean and loud. Coffee, fryer grease, silverware clinking, country music from a ceiling speaker. I grabbed the host stand with both hands and shouted for highway patrol before anyone asked what was wrong. When I tried to explain, my voice kept snagging on the details. In my van, under the sink, person. 2 employees and a driver followed me back only as far as the curb, which I do not blame them for. One of them had already called it in. From under the lights I could see my van sitting exactly as I'd left it. Side door open, yellow interior lamp throwing a rectangle onto the pavement. Nobody came out. That waiting was almost worse than the hand. Every second that passed gave the hidden person another possible shape in my mind. Small enough to fit under there. Quiet enough to do it for miles. Calm enough to close the door instead of panicking. By the time patrol arrived, the side door was still open and the interior looked unchanged. They cleared it with more confidence than I felt watching. The cabinet under the sink was empty when they opened it. Empty except for a damp sock, a crushed water bottle that wasn't mine, and streaks of grime where someone had been pressed against the inside wall. The gray water tank compartment connected to a narrow access void that ran behind the cabinets toward the rear storage, tighter than I would have believed a grown person could use, but possible if they were determined and willing to fold themselves around plumbing and wiring. One of the officers looked at me and asked if I'd picked anyone up. I said no so fast it almost sounded angry. I didn't sleep that night. I gave statements, answered practical questions, and watched strangers open every compartment of the van I'd built with my own hands. That's the part that stayed with me more than the fear at first. Not just that someone had gotten inside, but that they'd been in my private system, behind panels I installed, under the mattress I slept on, near the water I drank. Already inside before I even climbed into bed. I sold the van the next week. People told me that was extreme. Maybe it was. But I can't drive anything now unless I can see clean through from the driver's seat to the back glass without blind corners or hidden voids. What I still don't know is where the person got in. Somewhere along a 1,000-mile string of fuel stops, restrooms, and desert pumps. I must have looked away long enough for someone to slip into the machine I trusted most. I still replay every stop from that route, and every time I get to the moment where I think I would have noticed, I remember that warm, damp sock under my bed and realize I wouldn't have. What bothered me later was how ordinary the first clues were. A vent latch, protein bar, a quick hum from the pump. Every one of them sat inside the range of what a tired driver could explain away, especially if that driver trusted his own workmanship. I did. Completely. Maybe that's why it landed so hard. A stranger had turned my safest space into something used, studied, contaminated by attention. I still won't own another vehicle with blind storage under a bed platform. I still check every cabinet when I stop for gas. And the next story gets even closer to the bone, because it starts with someone who seemed helpful, familiar, almost kind, right up until the moment all the earlier details finally connected. Story 5. The shortcut. The photograph hit harder than the twisted ankle. The empty parking lot. Even hearing my own name from a stranger's mouth halfway down a mountain. Maybe because it turned everything before it into evidence. His timing. The questions about my dog. The way he smiled when I refused the shortcut. None of that was the scary part when it was happening. The scary part came later, when there was finally enough of it to make one complete shape. My name's Lena Pike. I was 31, newly single, and in the middle of one of those months where every bad decision looked like self-care. The hike wasn't supposed to be meaningful, just physically tiring. I was in the White Mountains in early October, doing a solo day hike because I needed something to fill a Saturday and nobody I knew was free. I don't like being alone outdoors as much as I pretend I do, which is why I over-prepare. I keep my car keys zipped into the pocket of my sleeping bag whenever I camp, and on day hikes I keep them in the inner pocket of my pack. The trail was brutal in the ordinary local way. Narrow switchbacks, loose scree, wet roots, and a creek roaring hard enough below the ridge that it masked every smaller sound. The air smelled like crushed granite and damp moss. About halfway down from the peak, I came down wrong on a slanted patch of rock and rolled my ankle. Not a dramatic break, just that instant hot twist that makes your whole leg blink white for a second. I sat on a boulder beside the trail, cursing at myself quietly and trying not to decide too early that I'd ruined the day. That's when the guy came up from below. I never heard him approach because of the creek. 1 second I was alone with my shoe half off. The next there was a friendly voice asking if I needed help. He was maybe in his 30s, dressed like any experienced hiker, neutral colors, decent boots, small pack. What registered first was that he wasn't breathing hard. This was a steep section of trail, and he wasn't flushed or sweating. Before I could say much, he crouched a little and said, "Lena, right? You look like you twisted it. I've got something better than ibuprofen if you want it." I remember smiling automatically because that's what you do when your brain hasn't caught up to a problem yet. Then my smile stayed there too long. I hadn't told him my name. There are ordinary explanations for that kind of thing, and I found one immediately because I needed one. I had signed the trail register at the lot. Maybe he'd seen me there. While I was building those excuses, he was already kneeling a few feet away, relaxed like we'd arranged to meet. I told him I was okay, probably just a sprain, and he nodded in a way that felt practiced. He didn't push the pill after that. He just talked. Said it gets dark fast on this side of the ridge. Said the sun drops behind that peak at around 6:20 and the temperature falls with it. Sounded useful, local, generous. I latched onto that. People who mean harm don't usually lead with practical advice. When I stood up and tested my ankle, he matched my pace automatically and said he'd walk with me till the lot. There were moments in the next stretch that bothered me, but each one arrived soft enough to smooth over. He kept exactly to my slower limp without ever seeming inconvenienced by it. He asked if my golden retriever was handling the summer heat better now that mornings were cooler. I laughed in this short, confused way and said, "I don't have my dog with me." He smiled and said, "I know." Then he looked ahead again. That should have been the point where I turned around or called someone or at least said something sharp enough to create distance. Instead, I started manufacturing explanations at a speed that now embarrasses me. My dog was on my social media. My profile wasn't private enough. Maybe he'd recognized me from somewhere online. Every answer I built sounded flimsy, but each one bought me another minute of not having to acknowledge the obvious. A little farther down, where the marked trail bent around a stand of scrub fir, he pointed to an overgrown side path I would have taken for an animal track and said it was a shortcut. His voice changed there, not in volume, just in certainty. He said it would save me nearly an hour of painful downhill walking on the ankle. He said the main trail washed out lower down anyway. He stepped onto the side path while he said it, like demonstrating. The brush around it was thick enough that after about 15 feet it turned to green-black shadow. I stopped. My ankle was throbbing so hard I could feel it in my teeth, but something in me finally locked into place. I said I was staying on the marked trail. I tried to make it sound casual, not like a refusal. He looked at me for one long second, then smiled warmly and lifted one shoulder. "Your call," he said. "Safe descent, Lena." Then he stepped back onto the main trail, moved past me, and disappeared around the next switchback. The relief was humiliating in how complete it was. My hands stopped slipping on my trekking pole. I even laughed once because it seemed possible that I had built a whole threat out of an awkward interaction. By the time I reached the lower trees, I had almost convinced myself that was exactly what happened. The stranger had been familiar, but some people are like that. Creepy isn't dangerous. I said that in my head more than once. Dusk hit faster than I wanted. The creek noise faded as the trail widened and the air took on that cold stone smell evening brings in the mountains. When I limped into the parking lot, every other car was gone. Mine sat alone under amber light from the lot entrance. I felt stupid for being relieved to see it untouched. Then I saw the paper under the wiper. It was a photograph, printed and sharp. The image was taken from inside my apartment bedroom, from near the closet, angled down toward the bed. I was asleep in it on top of my covers in an old college t-shirt, one arm flung across my face. Morning light was coming through the blinds. On the back, in neat block letters, were 6 words. The shortcut would have been faster. I locked myself inside the car and fumbled the key twice. My fingers had gone numb and greasy at the same time. I hit the locks, then hit them again, then started the engine and backed out so hard I threw gravel. I didn't inspect the back seat. I just drove. Somewhere on the descent I clipped a shoulder rock and shredded one tire, but I kept going on the flat because stopping felt impossible. The steering wheel shook so badly my forearms went dead from gripping it. I made it to the nearest police station 2 hours later on a rim that was almost bare. After that I put heavy iron bars on every ground floor window in my apartment and adopted a second dog, a shepherd mix from a rescue that specifically described him as not for first-time owners. I still haven't decided which part of that day was the real threat. The stranger on the trail or all the moments before that when he must have already known enough about me to use my name, mention my dog, and walk beside me like we were continuing a conversation I had never agreed to start. What I can't stop thinking about is the side path. If I had stepped off the marked trail with my bad ankle and followed him into those trees, I don't know how long it would have taken before anyone realized I had chosen the shortcut. Since then, every harmless fork in every trail feels arranged in advance. I've replayed that hike so many times that some parts feel brighter now than they did in the moment. The way he wasn't sweating. The way the creek covered his approach. The way he accepted my refusal too easily, as if the point wasn't to argue with me there. The point was to let me carry the rest of it home and assemble it later. That's what still works on me. Not one enormous memory, but a line of smaller ones that keep changing shape every time I hold them up to the photograph. I still hike sometimes, but never without checking the lot first, and never without looking into the trees before I unlock my car. Because now I know how close a stranger can get to your life before they ever have to touch you.